guys, what is up? My name is Josh, or you may know me as DodaTech. Today we're doing another computer build. So, client called me up and he just wanted a home use computer. He wants to run a few low powered programs, and yeah, we designed a computer around that. We spoke for about an hour and a half. And yeah, so we got him some components. So for the CPU, we went with the Intel Pentium G3258. This is Intel's Anniversary Edition processor, and it's also overclockable. We're probably not going to be doing that since we're just going to be using the stock cooler, but this is a very nice CPU. For RAM, we're using Kingston HyperX Fury. This is 8 GB of 1866 MHz RAM. And it's targeted at gamers, but this was one of the cheapest kits we could find, so we just went with that. For storage, we went with a Western Digital 1TB blue. Very fast drive, 7200 RPM, and it's going to be great. For the motherboard, went with the Asus H81M-Plus. This board also got shipped to me, and it's got a puncture mark in it, in the box. I've looked at the board, it looks okay, but if it doesn't boot, that's probably why. So we're hoping here. For a power supply, it's the same one we used in the last video, or video series, I should say. It's a Thermaltake Light Power 500 watt OEM. It actually says on it that it's a 450 watt power supply, but it's a... hold on. No, that was the one we used in the last video. It's almost the exact same power supply, except the one we used in the last video was a 450 watt with a max output or a peak output of 500 watts. This one claims to be 500 watts the whole time, so we'll see. We also went with a TP-Link, what is the model number on this? TLWN881ND. This is a 300 megabits per second wireless and PCI Express adapter. The customer wanted Wi-Fi, so we went with that. We went with Windows 7 Home Premium, 64-bit, as well as a standard $20 DVD burner. So yeah, forgot the case. The case is the Bitfenix Prodigy M. So Bitfenix does two lineups of the Prodigy. There's the Prodigy, the standard Prodigy, which takes a mATX board, which is a smaller board than what we've got here, and the Prodigy M that takes an mATX board. The mATX case is a little more difficult to work in, so if you're wanting this case for like your first build, probably not the best case to choose, but it is a very nice case. Yeah, so I suppose we should start by opening up the case and seeing what's inside. So, by the way, standard Phillips number 2 screwdriver. I've got a nice ratcheting one here that you can change the bits on. Probably the only tool you're going to need, that and a knife to unbox stuff. You might need scissors, you might need other screwdrivers, stuff like that, but at the bare minimum you'll need these two tools. So we're going to take out the thumb screws here, which are actually very nice. These are the nicest thumb screws I've seen in a very long time. Now, I've already inspected this case for damage, so I've opened it up and had a look, and I've noticed that the side panels are a little difficult to get off because of the I/O connectors on this case, which are on the side panel. So this one, not as hard, you just kind of move it back and sort of pull it off. It's a little difficult, sometimes you have to move it forward a little bit. But eventually it comes off. So, like that. Now, you want to set these in the case box with the styrofoam in between them. So I'm just going to set these over here. They're very heavy side panels as well, which is always a good sign. It means high quality, usually. But yeah, I've just brought the box over, and we're going to take the I/O side panel off as well. This one's a little harder to take off. Come on. Like I said, they're kind of difficult to get off. There we are, got the second one off. And yeah, so this has got all your I/O on it, and we'll get to that later. Like I said, you want to sit them in the box with the styrofoam between them. And straight away, when you look in the case, we get this box of hardware. So in here we've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6 zip ties, all your case mounting hardware and screws, as well as a socket adapter, Phillips head to socket adapter for your standoffs, and a USB 3 to USB 2.0 adapter. This is very nice that they included that, since not all motherboards have USB 3. We're going to sit this over here for now. And next, there's this twist tie that we're going to take off. You never want to have twist ties in your system because they've got wire in them and they could short out against components and whatever, so you just want to chuck that away. And yeah, there's also another twist tie in here for a fan cable. We're going to leave that one on for the moment. And also one on the power supply cord, which we're also going to take off, just because we need the power supply cord to come out. So we're just going to chuck them in the box. Alright, now I said this was a difficult case to work in because it is very small. What we need to do is remove this drive cage. So there's 4 screws, one here, 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 and here, and we're going to remove them. But before we do that, we're just going to tidy up our work area, so I'm going to move some stuff behind me here. So we're not really going to need any of this for the moment. So I'm just going to move this all away. There we are. Sit it all back there. And now we're going to remove these screws that hold the drive cage in. Set my screwdriver to ratchet properly. Now these look like standard case screws, but they're a little smaller. Like the heads, they're a little smaller. So probably keep them, but keep these separate to all your other screws since they're probably different. Before you remove the last screw, make sure you take hold of the drive holder, just so it doesn't fall out on you. There we are, the drive holder's out, and so is the screw. Now we've got better access to our motherboard tray, and what we're going to do is, now that we've got more room, is remove these twist ties, from the fan wires. So if I can see which way it twists. There we are. Sometimes the most difficult part is getting the components ready and out of the box. So yeah. And for me, apparently it's getting zip ties off. Zip ties, twist ties, and also speaking is very difficult apparently. So yeah, we're just taking these twist ties off. And yeah, so we're ready to install some components. So if we look at the box of mounting hardware we've got, we'll see that we got these rubber washer things and these, if I can find them, hard drive screws. They look like closest thing to a hard drive screw. So what we're going to do is grab our hard drive, like I said, this is a Western Digital 1TB blue. We're going to open it up, slide the drive out. We've got the clay desiccant, do not eat this. Apparently it's the only thing you shouldn't eat in this system, and we're going to set that, oh, I missed, whatever, back there. Make sure you don't touch the circuit board, you don't want to shock that. And yeah, so that's our drive. So we're going to mount the drive in the case, and you've got to kind of do some imagining. So in this case, this drive holder sits in like this. Actually, it goes on the inside, but it sits in like that. So we want to mount the drive so it's on the inside with the SATA connector. I'll show you the SATA connector. So that this SATA connector right here is on the front side of the case, so it's up front here. So basically the drive needs to go in this way. So we've got to do some imagining and find out where it's going to go. So it's going to sit like this, and we're probably going to want to use the bottom mounting mechanism. So what we want to do is grab the screws that are in question. I'm going to show you one of the screws here. This little round-headed screw with the coarse thread is the one I'm going to try. I don't know if I can show you that. Doesn't seem to be focusing, but I'm just going to try that inside the hard drive. So I'm just going to grab my screwdriver and see if it threads. Now you should be able to thread it with your hand if it's the right screw. So I'm not going to try that because my fingers are too big for the screw, so I'm just going to use the screwdriver. You should be able to insert it part the way and not be able to pull it out, but you should be able to unscrew it and screw it in with ease. And you shouldn't be able to push or pull the screw easily. So now we're going to put that rubber mount on the screw. Put the screw on the end of your screwdriver, and we're going to use the bottom mounts for this drive. So we're just going to put the rubber thing on the drive, stick the screw on the end of your screwdriver, and there's 4 holes on the bottom of the drive, so we're going to use 4 screws. Being careful to keep the rubber thing in place. And you just want to snug it up. Not too tight, not too loose. And yeah, so you want to grab 4 of these, since we have 4 drive holes. And I'm placing these with the bigger side down, so the bigger side of the rubber bit is down on the drive. It most likely won't matter which way it goes into the drive. If it does need to go another way, now I've done this wrong. I've squished the rubber thing a bit weird. So I'm just going to release it, move the rubber thing around, screw it back in, making sure the rubber bit doesn't get squished funny. Tighten it down. Just snug them up as best as you can. Once they stop turning, that's as far as you should go. You're not making it waterproof or airtight or anything like that. So we just want to grab 4 of these per drive and yeah, just install them. By the time you've tightened them down as far as they go, the screw head actually goes underneath, well, no, not underneath, inside the rubber bit. And yeah, so that's all 4 done. Now we just insert it into the larger holes of the drive tray, and I'll show you this here. Being sure to check which way you're placing it. So you see, here's the drive holder, here's the hard drive with the screws installed, as you may see. One of the rubber things has come off, and I don't know how. Apparently it fell off whilst I was... Alright, I think I might have put these screws in the wrong way. So we're going to untie them and see if putting it in the other way with the smaller bit down helps that at all. Unless we're using the wrong screws, which there's no other screws to use, this should be fine. So I'm going to test this. That actually looks much better, but the bit still comes off. So I'm going to test and see if any other screws fit in the drive, which I don't think they do. No, it's those screws. Oh well, we're just going to push them on, I suppose. No, we're going to do it the other way, and we'll be right back. Alright guys, so I figured it out. What we had to do was put the rubber vibration isolators, which look like this. They're just little O-rings. We had to put them in the drive holder first. So what we're going to do is just sit this drive holder on top of the drive in the way we want it oriented. Like so. And this is the way I'm going to do it. If you can find an easier way, you do it your way, but I'm going to do it this way. And you want to tighten them down diagonally. So we're going to start with this top corner up here. If I can get the screwdriver lined up with the screw. And I can set the ratchet. So this provides tension on the rubber bit so it doesn't pop out of the holder, but it also locks the drive in. So we're doing it, we're not tightening them down the whole way yet, just till they give a little bit of tension, and then we're doing all of them like that. You probably can't see because of my hands being in the way. Just tightening them down. Then once you've done the last one, you can snug them right up, like so. One can probably snug up a bit more. Yep. Snug them right up. It's probably a good idea to still go diagonally, guys, just so you don't put any unnecessary stress on the hard drive. And yeah, so this is the last screw. And that's the hard drive installed. Now that our hard drive's ready to be installed, we're just going to put that aside for now. And now you want to grab your CPU, your motherboard, and your RAM. Now we're going to install these now, so we're going to put the RAM and the CPU aside for the moment and focus merely on the motherboard. So if we open this up here, you'll see straight away we've got the motherboard. So we're going to pull that out, being sure to hold it by the plastic parts and the back plate, and just set that down. In this little compartment under here, we've got the I/O shield, which we'll need for later, so put that aside with your CPU and RAM. You've also got your motherboard manual and other quick start guides, driver CDs, case badges, and warranty cards. And in this final bit of packaging, we pull this tab, or just let them slide out, we've got our set of 2 SATA cables, and we're, if I don't drop them too much, going to be using both of these. And this packaging we can throw over there. Put these SATA cables aside with your CPU, RAM, and I/O shield. Close up the box. And we'll be using this as a test bench. So yeah. So now that we've got our motherboard here, we want to pick it up and see where the bag opens. Now, before you touch the motherboard, touch a metal part of your case, preferably unpainted, just to ground yourself, or touch something large and metal like a fridge behind you. You should be building in a kitchen something that's not on carpet so you don't cause unnecessary static. Okay, now that we've done that, we're going to pull out the motherboard, holding it by the CPU backplate and the CPU socket cover, and just set it on the motherboard box. It is okay to set it on the bag. We're not going to do it because it causes arguments. Now that we've got the motherboard out, we'll see that we've got the CPU socket here, 2 sockets for RAM here, a video card socket, as well as 3 other 1X sockets here, our SATA connectors, which we'll be using after, and all our I/O ports at the back here. So, let's start with the CPU. This is our CPU, it's the Intel Pentium Anniversary Edition, and you'll see the CPU is actually right there. There's 2 sides you can cut to this box. There's the side with all our warranty information, and the side with the tiny little piece of tape. We're going to cut the side with the tiny little piece of tape, so that if for whatever reason we need to send this CPU back for warranty, we've still got all the information. Now that we've opened that up, like so, you'll see here's the tab here. If we open it up with that down, you'll see it's all going to fall out. So we're going to flip it over and pull the CPU out like so. And you'll see that documentation comes out with it. So the documentation we got was our McAfee resellers license thing that comes with Intel processors now because Intel owns McAfee, as well as our warranty and install book with our Intel Pentium case sticker. Probably not going to use them. We also pulled out the CPU heatsink and fan. So you'll see there's a plastic bit over this. You do not want to touch that thermal goop that's on here. Basically, put a hand on top, hand on bottom, flip it over, and just let it fall out into your hand, and set that aside still with the plastic on it. You'll see our CPU is still in this box here, so you can either pull it out this way, like so, it just comes out a little slot in the top there, or you can pull out one of the corners that are in the box here, and there's our CPU. This CPU has got 1150 tiny little pins on the bottom, or not pins, landings. There's 1150 tiny little pins in the socket, and you don't want to touch the top or the bottom of the CPU. This is still in its plastic, so I can handle this as badly as I want, just as long as I'm not throwing it or anything. The CPU is delicate, but it isn't, well, it's not going to break if you drop it or anything. So now we want to go back to the socket, and you'll see there's this little arm here. You want to push that down and away, and you'll see it comes up. You want to lift that back, and now we can see the 1150 tiny little pins in the socket. Now, grab your CPU and get your thumb under that cut corner there, and you'll see the plastic unfolds, and you'll see there's a little notch in the socket here and here. There's also a little notch in the CPU here and here to match. There's also on the socket cover a little triangle there. There's also a little triangle on the CPU right there. This shows you which way to put your CPU in. So if we open up this socket cover, grabbing our CPU by the edges, there's two little cutouts in the plastic, holding it so it's easy to manage, and you'll see the CPU is heavier than it looks, but you just want to line up one corner with the notch and then just drop it in, give it a little wiggle, being careful not to touch the top. And our CPU's in the socket. Do not push down on this. This is a zero insertion force socket, or a zip socket, so you don't want to put any force on the CPU. You want to lower this retention lid, and making sure the little teeth are under the screw here. Push down on this arm and sit it back under the little cover there, and this cover just comes straight off and our CPU is installed. You'll want to keep this cover for warranty purposes for the motherboard, because if you ship the motherboard back to the company and this isn't on it, or your CPU isn't in it, they won't honor your warranty and it becomes null and void and you're out however much your motherboard is worth. And you really don't want to be shipping your CPU with it because, well, the CPU costs a lot more money than this little plastic cover, so just keep the cover. Next, we're going to install our Intel stock heatsink fan. You'll see it has thermal goop on the bottom here. And it doesn't matter which way you put it in the socket. You'll see there's little pegs here, 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 and here. They have to line up with the little holes that are in each corner of the CPU. It doesn't matter which way this fan goes, but we're going to untangle this wire here for the fan lead. And you'll see that it comes out here. Now we've got to find our CPU fan. CPU fan header that this plugs into. You see there's one here, but that's labeled chassis fan. There's another one up here, which is labeled CPU fan. So we've got it oriented right, we can just plug it in right here. So now that we've got that in, you want to take your thumbs, and on this corner, or on any one of the corners, push down till it clicks. Then on the opposite corner, push down till it clicks. Another corner till it clicks. That one's not clicking. And then the last corner till it clicks. And you just want to double check them. And Now you can lift up the board by the heatsink and see if the little, see here there's little plastic bits with the black bits that came through. If that has done that, then your CPU cooler is installed correctly, but it's always a good idea to double check it. Now, this fan cable. The reason we installed the CPU fan, in my opinion, upside down is because the fan has to plug in over here. If we plugged it in over here, or if we had it the other way around, you see how this lead crosses the fan? We do not want this lead getting tangled up in the fan, stopping the fan, basically killing your computer. This will make your CPU overheat, and it will get to over 100 degrees Celsius in about a couple of seconds. So you want to be able to plug it in, but what we're going to do is we're going to tie this up with some zip ties, so let me just grab some of them here. I like to tie it up with 2 zip ties, since it just makes it a little easier. So what you want to do is you want to grab this fan, see where it's going to plug in. You see it's going to plug in here. So you know you're going to need a little bit of cable. So you want to, I tie it around 2 fingers, making sure it can still plug in. Yep. Then I squeeze the cable together, grab a zip tie, clamp it down, but not all the way, since you want to be able to do some adjustments. You still want to have it on though. This one, once it's close to the edge, you can clamp it down all the way. It doesn't really matter. Then you want to grab your zip tie cutters and cut this tail off. You see that went flying away. Now you want to tie up the other end of this cable. So we're just going to do the same thing here. Grab the zip tie, put the zip tie around. Tighten it up most of the way until you get it right at the edge where it's holding all of the wires. Cut the tail off. There we are. Now you just want to plug it into the fan header labeled CPU fan. The connector is keyed and there's a key in the connector, so it will only go in one way. You'll want to just slide it on. It should go in perfectly. There we are. And that's on. And this won't get in the way of the fan. Later on, when it's in the case, we can cable tie that out of the way, but that shouldn't get into the way of the fan because it's kind of stiff. Next, you want to grab our memory, or we want to grab our memory, and you'll see it says quality seal. Don't know what that means. We're going to cut the quality seal, so I'm guessing it's low quality now. I don't know. It's basically just a seal to stop it falling out of the packaging. We want to unbox the RAM here. And this RAM actually looks really good. So we've got 8 gigs here, 2 4 gig sticks. It's a little different to the other RAM I showed you in the previous build, where it was half height RAM. So it was half the size of this. It also didn't have a heatsink on it. And yeah, so we're just going to relieve it from its clamshell packaging here. If I can. Like I said earlier, sometimes the most difficult part is getting the products out of the box. There we are. We took the lid off and there's our RAM. Now your RAM goes here. Now you should see etched onto the board, if you have more than 2 sockets, DIM A1, A2, B1, B2, something like that. Basically, if you've got 4 sockets and there's 2 separate colors, you want to go with all in one color if you've got 2 sticks. And if you're going with 4 sticks, you want to get the 2 channels right. So basically, if you've got 2 sticks and you've got 2 slots, you're just going to put the RAM in. If you've got 2 sticks and 4 slots, you want to use the same colored slots. If they're all one color and you've got 4, check your manual to which ones to use. Usually they're opposite ones. So I'm going to spin this around here so you can see a little better. Now, the RAM, you want to avoid touching it at what's called the gold fingers. These are these gold bits here, and you don't want to touch that. So what you want to do is open up the slots by pulling the tabs back. Some motherboards only have tabs on one end, so maybe your motherboard may be different to ours. Just want to grab your RAM out of the package. Now this has got a heatsink on it, so it's fine to hold it by anywhere on the heatsink. If yours doesn't have a heatsink, hold it by the edges. And yeah, so you'll see there's a notch in the RAM here, and also a notch in the socket. Just slide it in so the notch and the slot in both line up. Grab your thumbs, push down, but wait. If we do that one first, it's going to be a bit of a squeeze to get the RAM in between this CPU cooler and the next socket. So we're going to pull it out and slot it in the other one, making sure the notch and the slot is the right way. Stick it in, firm pressure with thumbs until it clicks, and that RAM is installed. That's 4 out of our 8 gigs installed. Now we're going to grab our other 4 gig module, line it up in the track. There we are. It's in the track, thumbs, till it clicks. And now we've got 8 gigs of RAM installed. There's no wires for RAM, so there's nothing really we need to worry about. And that's our motherboard prepared. So we've fully assembled the motherboard. We've placed the hard drive onto the hard drive tray mount thing. Now what we need to do is prepare the case to install the motherboard, power supply, hard drive, optical drive, basically everything we're going to put in. So inside this case, the power supply goes up front here. There's a little thumb screw, and this is going to be hard to film, but there's a little thumb screw that you undo that releases the power supply bracket. What you want to do is screw your power supply to this. Now, our power supply has a fan on the bottom, so we want to sit it so the power supply intakes air from the front of the case. So, bearing in mind that this goes this way, we want the fan that way, we just slot the power supply in, and you'll see, if I come around here, there's one screw in every corner, so here, 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 and one is offset. Sometimes your power supply can't be put in 2 different directions, but yeah. But while we're here, we also want to take off this little warning sticker, like that. We're just going to stick that over there. And yeah, so we want to put a screw, one in every corner, and in the offset one. So power supply and case screws, generally, they're the same. So this might be a little difficult since I have all these cables here. But power supply screws, they look like this. They have a hex head with a coarse thread, and yes, they look like this. Hex head with the coarse thread, and you want 4 of these. Usually they're a Phillips number 2-bit. I really haven't seen one that isn't a Phillips number 2-bit. And we're going to install that into the power supply like so. You want to just start them for the moment, and it's good to go diagonally so you have a little bit of wiggle room with the other screws, and you don't put any unnecessary pressure on the power supply. Generally, the power supply isn't one of those components that need will be damaged by too much pressure, but it can't hurt to go diagonally. So we've got the 4 screws, one in every corner and then one in the offset one. So yeah, doing the last screw now. And now we just want to tighten them down. Well, not tighten them, just snug them. You don't want them too ridiculously tight. That power supply is installed into the bracket. Now before we install any of these components, we want to install the optical drive. So inside the case, if I can come show you, this case is a lot lighter without the side panels, by the way. There are these little tabs to remove the front panel in here, and there's 2 on each side. This is just with this case that has the 2 on each side. Sometimes larger cases have 3 on each side, 4 on each side. This is just a magnetic cover that goes on the bottom of the case. We're going to set that back there because we don't need it. But yeah, I'm just going to push those tabs out and forward. And you'll see, if I can find the last one, when I do that, the front panel usually comes off. So if I push these, there we are, front panel's off. So what we're going to do is we have to remove this cover here. So there's a tab here and a tab here that you have to basically, actually, do you just, yeah, you push it in. You push it in like that. So you push it in from the front, so it sits up here, you just push it in, and it comes out like so. There's the cover. Now that that's off, we can't exactly put the drive in yet because there's still this cover up front here. But the way that comes out is you just kind of bend it like so. I don't know why they leave these in. I find them stupid. But as soon as you just want to wiggle it and it comes out. As soon as these are out, they're not going to go back in unless you, I don't know, weld it or something. But yeah, so now that that's in, we're going to put this front panel back on just by lining up the clips and pushing. That front panel's back on. Now we're going to take the DVD drive, making sure it's the right way, and just slide it in from the front and line it up. Now if you don't know which screws to use, just take the DVD drive back out, find a screw that looks like it might fit. I'm going to try these ones. And just test it. Should be able to tighten it down, screw it in a tiny bit with your screw, and then once it's in a tiny bit, you should be able to move it around with your fingers. Yep. So for us, we're using the round-headed fine thread screws, and we're going to use 4 of them, and I'll show you what they look like. They look like this. They're a very fine thread, and they have a round head. That rhymes. These are also generally used for PCI Express cards as well. Generally. Sometimes they use case screws. But yeah, so you want to put this aside, this cover, with all the other components that we're setting aside. And anything you're going to see from the front installs from the front. So you just want to slide it in, making sure it's the right way. Line it up. And you'll see there's screw holes, 2 on each side. So we just want to grab the screws, screw them in, not the whole way, just start them, because we want to be able to wiggle it around. Most front panel card readers and stuff like that will use the same screws. You just want to make sure it's aligned. This one, for whatever reason, has a little bit of a gap on either side. Screw them in. Grab. You want to put all 4 screws in if it's got holes for 4 screws. Just make sure it stays lined up before you tighten them down. We're doing the other side here. Sorry if you don't have a good look of this. There's no real nice way to film this. I'm trying to do the best I can. And yeah, so now, checking that it's still aligned, we're going to tighten these screws down. Snug, but not too tight like always. And yeah, so we're just going to do all 4 of them. There they are. And that's our optical drive installed. So if we had this plugged in right now, that would be our optical drive. Next, I think we're going to install the motherboard, so we'll be back in a second with a better look of this. So now we're going to install the motherboard. So you'll see that there's already screws inside the case. These are called standoffs, and these are going to be probably the permanent ones, and they're already set up for mini ITX boards, which is the board smaller than we've got here. So what we're going to have to do is, before we install anything, is grab that I/O shield I showed you earlier, take it out of the bag. Now it can go in any direction in this slot, but these grounding tabs have to be on the inside of the case. But that doesn't stop us from seeing which way that these ports go. Well, the audio ports, which are these 3 or sometimes 6 holes, usually go on the bottom, whereas these PS2 ports usually go on the top. In this case though, the motherboard is inverted, so these audio ports are going to go closest to the PCI Express slots, which are located here. To put this in, you just slide it in from the inside of the case, like so. So it goes in that hole, push in each corner. This can be difficult sometimes. Like so. And it's basically a friction fit, but there's all these little dots around the outside here that basically have to be on the outside of the case and have to be seen. So now that's in, we can lay the case back down, making sure not to trap any wires or anything, and basically get all the wires out of your workspace, so all that's fine. Now you want to grab the motherboard, and you want to orient it in the right direction so that the I/O goes out the back side of the case, and just dry fit it. Now there's a grounding tab on this PS2 port here. I don't know why, but there is. And you'll see this motherboard's a little bit difficult to get in with the optical drive, so we're just going to uninstall that here. There's always a certain way to do things, and I screwed up here and put the optical drive in before the motherboard because I thought the motherboard would fit in with the optical drive in, but apparently it doesn't. So we're just going to, I suppose this is a better look of how the optical drive goes in as well. So we're just going to undo the 2 screws on each side. And we'll just slide the optical drive out front ways, and we'll install that again after we've installed the motherboard. So now I'm going to flip this around so it's the right way for you guys. Now we're going to test fit the motherboard again. Slide it into the I/O, making sure that all the ports line up in the back of the case. And you want to see which standoffs that are pre-installed line up. So in our case, all of the ones that are pre-installed line up. So I can see the standoff in this hole up here, in this hole up here. See if I can get you a better angle. This one down here, and this one down here. So all we've got is these two screws left. So we're going to take the motherboard out, set it back on the box, and I know which screws to use. We're going to use the topmost one here and the topmost one here. So we're going to grab the little bit that came with it, which is a Phillips head to 5mm socket adapter. We're going to grab that, stick that on the end of our screwdriver with one of these standoffs. These are usually made of brass. These ones are painted, so it makes it nicer. I'm going to stick that in, and before we do that though, we're just going to see if we can get them hand tight inside the case. Or at least started. So that one's in. We're going to grab another one out of the pile of screws that came with the case and slide it into this one. Then we're going to grab our socket, place that on. See if you can tighten it up with your thumbs any easier. But then we're going to grab our screwdriver, set the ratchet setting right. Tighten it up, same with the other one. Tighten it up, being careful not to strip the threads. And there, we've got all the standoffs in. Now, we want to lay the motherboard back into the case and check one more time that it's all lined up. The best way to lay it into the case is to guide it in I/O first. Make sure all the ports are lined up. Line it up with the standoffs that have got the ridge so it stays in. And there, the motherboard's in. Make sure that none of the ports are covered, like we have done with the Ethernet port on this I/O shield. It's been covered by the grounding tab, so we've just got to bend that up a little more and make sure it goes over the port. I'm going to line it back up. Set the motherboard in, set that shield cover thing back down, and check the ports one more time, and that's in. So now we're going to grab the case screws we showed earlier. If that's the ones we're using, I don't think it is. I think we'll be using these screws, not them ones, these ones. And we're just going to test here and see if they fit. Alright. Looks like we've used the wrong screw, or the wrong standoff location, in the motherboard here. That could have been bad. You don't want a standoff in a hole that's not where a standoff hole is going to be, because that will ground out against the board and short the board out. So what we're going to do is set my screwdriver to take this out, and we're going to use the bottom hole here. That could have been a very bad mistake if I didn't check that. So we're going to stick that in. We'll get the standoff in hand tight first. It's also very bad if you have a standoff in the wrong location because it can scratch traces. But yeah, that's really unlikely unless you've got it in a really wrong location and you're physically trying to scratch the back of the board. So now that we've got that in, we're just going to test and see if the screw's right. Might be easier if I put it on my screwdriver. See if that threads. And that doesn't want to thread, so we're going to try the other screws with the rounded head, the rounded domed head, and they fit a lot better. So we're going to want to grab as many screws as we have standoffs. So in this case it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But before we do that, we want to put the motherboard in and check that we've got the standoff in the right location. Motherboard's in. That standoff, I can now see through it. That standoff mounting point, I can now see through it. And yeah, so might be better if I flip it around this way, you might get a better look. So we're going to grab these domed, These domed screws with the round head with the fine thread that we used for the optical drive earlier. And we're going to put these in one by one diagonally, not tightening them down straight away, just starting them. So one in that corner, one in this corner. Now you don't want to tighten them straight away, just in case one of them doesn't line up, and you need so you don't have to back the others out just to move the board a tiny bit. One in this corner. One in this corner. And then the middle ones can go last. So we're going to put one in this one first, and we're going to tighten this one all the way down because it's kind of a squeeze to get in here. So it's just a little bit past snug. I can't exactly say how much force you should put on it, but it's really until it stops turning easily. And yes, we're going to tighten this one. And then we're going to go diagonally to tighten the rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the motherboard mounted in the case. Just because we took it out, we're going to mount the optical drive back in. So make sure it's the right way. Slide it in. And if I flip this case around, you'll see you want to line it up at the front, and you'll see the screw holes line up here. So it's the same screws as we installed the motherboard with. And you want to put 2 in on each side, at least. So 1. Don't tighten them straight away, because you want to be able to move it around in case it doesn't line up properly. With this particular optical drive and this particular case, we're using the 3rd screw back, 3rd screw hole back to line it up. And we're going to grab 2 more screws here. Flip the case right over. Give you a good angle of that. Well, as best as I can. Now these ones, if it's lining up, you can tighten them down. This one I have to hold to get it in. So this maybe will prove a little difficult. And this is why you don't tighten them. If these were tightened all the way on the other side, I wouldn't be able to move it right now. This is a very awkward angle to be putting a screw in. But I'm going to do my best here. So that one I tightened down a little bit more than the others, just so it would stay still. And this one's going in like this. 1, 2. It's good to count off screws so you know how many you've put in and how many you've tightened. 3, 4, and the optical drive's back in. Next, we want to install the power supply. So, as you would have seen earlier, hopefully, this cable came in like this, and to put the power supply in, this may prove difficult, we need to plug it in, switch it on, because this has an extension lead going in, because it goes into the front of the case, and then we kind of need to rest it inside the mount, and this is very difficult because I've got a huge bunch of cables here. So yeah, that's inside the mount there, and then we just need to put that thumb screw back in, if I can find it. There it is, which goes in right here at the base. Now that we've got our power supply screwed in, we're going to unbundle these cables here. It's just got a rubber band on them. Rubber bands are alright in your system, I just don't want these cables all bundled up. We're going to chuck that over here. We're just going to dangle these outside of the case. Also, we're probably going to want to put the other side panel on now, so we get all the I/O in. But before we do that, we're going to see where we're going to put our wireless adapter. So this is our wireless adapter. We're going to cut it open here. It's in this plastic wrap around the outside of the box. I don't know why companies do this. It's just more waste that I have to throw out each time I build a computer. But we're going to unbox this TP-Link wireless N 300 megabits per second PCI Express card. Have the box be completely retarded on us, and you'll see we've got our warranty card, driver and software CD, quick installation manual. We've got a half-height bracket, so if you're using a half-height case, you would use this. 2 wireless antenna, and the card itself in this anti-static bag with the sticker on it that we're just going to cut, with being very careful not to cut the actual PCI Express card itself. We're going to touch the case before we pull this out on a metal part, handling it by the bracket and the edges. We're going to pull it out and see, it can go in any slot here. We've actually got, if I set this on the motherboard box, 4 slots in this motherboard here. So we've got 3 1x slots and 1 16x slot. And this card can go in any one of these. So what we're going to do is undo the thumb screw that's at the top of the case here that releases this PCI Express shield. And I don't think we can pull that up. and we're basically just going to decide which slot we're going to put that in. So I don't know which slot we're going to put it in, so we're going to wait for the moment and probably install our cabling now. So the biggest and bulkiest connector from your power supply, if I just cut this zip tie that's on it, is going to be your 20+4 pin, which is this one here. It's a very bulky connector, and it's actually got plastic on it, which you're going to have to pull off. If any of these components have plastic on it, pull it off, because it can melt when it gets hot, and that really stinks. If you've never smelt burning plastic, don't. It's really bad. It's probably going to give you a headache. And this is going to go right next to the RAM here on this 20+4 pin socket. So there's a clip on it, which you can see here, and there's a ridge on the edge of the socket here, and the clip just basically goes over the ridge, and you just push it on with a bit of force, and that's the 24 pin installed. Before we do anything else, we're going to put the I/O side panel back on. So I've got that here. I'm just going to set that on the motherboard box there. So we want to flip this case up. Going to just clean up our work area a bit, throw a couple of these packages back on the bench behind me. And I've got my case upside down, so I'm just going to flip this back around. And the I/O side panel goes on... Which side does it go on? It goes on this side. But if we want to install that, we're going to have to put the hard drive in first, which we can't do, so that's going to have to wait. Alright, looks like that PCI Express thing does fall out. So yeah, this is going to be very difficult to tie up. So we're going to do the best we can here. Next, we're going to want to hook up our SATA cables. And you'll see the SATA connectors are down here at the bottom of the board. There's two black ones and two gold ones. The gold ones are the fastest ones on this board. They're SATA 6 instead of SATA 3. And we're going to plug both of the SATA cables that came with our motherboard in here. And we're going to plug the straight one into our optical drive that's right here. And the right angled one's going to go into our hard drive once we install that. So we're just going to dangle that here, and yeah. That's really all we have to do until we get that side panel on. So we're going to undo the side panel cables from their twist tie. And yeah, so we're just going to untangle them here. Which is what I'm trying to do. And we're going to find a box to sit this panel on whilst we try to install these cables. So bear with me a sec here. So we're going to use the box from our previous build that had the R9 270X in it. We're just going to sit this panel here. And here we go. So the biggest connector on our panel is the USB 3. You see it's got two really fat large cables on it. It's also blue on the end. It's got 19 little holes in it. And the only place it's going to go is right under this 24 pin with the USB 3 front header. It is keyed, it's got a little notch on it, so it can only go in one way. And we're just going to click that on here. And that's our front panel USB 3 installed. Next, we've got our audio. So we've got two options here. And I'm just trying to find the audio connector on this board. I think I've found it. Anyway, we've got AC97 and HD audio. These are the two options. And yeah, most modern motherboards use HD audio. You'll see they have the same connector, it's just wired differently. And what we're going to do before we install that onto the board is take a zip tie and zip tie the AC97 header or connector back. So the client, if he opens up the system, doesn't think, oh, something's fallen off, and then worry. So we're just going to tie that back. And we'll cut the tail off. Making sure not to cut any wires in the process. And this is going to go in on the header labeled HD audio. It's got a little knockout, a pin that's blocked out, and there's a pin missing on the motherboard, so it will only go in one way. We're just going to slide that on here. Sorry guys, this is really difficult to see. There's not much light here. There we are, and that is on, I think. Alright. We've also got our front panel connectors down here on this little gold bit next to the SATA connectors. Now, to film this, I'm going to pull the SATA connector out of the optical drive and just sit that out of the way. So we'll just sit that under there. And hopefully you can see this, but it's not etched straight onto the motherboard like some motherboards have it. So you want to grab your motherboard manual, and on, usually it's one of the first pages, it details where all these headers are. So page 1 to 18, or chapter 1, page 18, says in this motherboard manual here. Alright, so says the first one is the power LED. The first one on the top is the power LED positive and negative from left to right, and the one just below it is the hard drive positive and negative. So we're going to sit that manual right here. I don't know if you can see that. But we're going to find the cables that say power LED and hard drive LED. You'll see there's a little arrow on the connector saying which side is positive. And that is going to go on, but first we'll do the reset switch and power switch. So we've got the power on top and the reset on bottom. So we're going to start with the reset. And as long as you've got it on the right block of connectors, you're not really going to damage anything. Switches, it doesn't matter which way they go onto the board, like which way the connector is oriented. But with LEDs it does, so if you're putting in LEDs, make sure you've got your positives and negatives right. And this panel is really hard to put in, so we're just going to put that one on the bottom. And we need a taller box, so I'm just going to go grab one. So we're just going to put this box here. And
we're just stacking up this panel so we can actually get the wires in. And we're just going to put the other connector on the 2 pins directly on top. So I'm going to split these a little bit, give me a little bit more room. If you get the power and reset switch backwards, it's not going to do anything too bad. It's just that the buttons will be backwards on the front panel. Your power will be your reset will be your power. That's the only problem with doing that. So I'm actually just going to set this panel sideways. And then we're going to put in the power LED and the hard drive LED. So the hard drive LED is the one that goes on the bottom set of pins. So we're going to stick that in, or on those pins. And the power LED is in 2 connectors. So and they're labeled which one is positive and which one is negative. So I'm going to put the negative on the negative pin, and the positive on the positive pin. That's our front panel headers. If you had a speaker, you could install that now, but we don't, so we're not going to. And yeah. So now that we've done that, we're going to reinstall the optical drive cable. And then not really much else to do. So what we could do if we wanted to is remove the I/O from this circuit board here. We could just take the 2 screws out, pull it out, and have our I/O there. But we're not going to do that. So what we're going to do is put this panel back on. But first we have to put the hard drive in. So we've wired up the main motherboard connector. Now it's time to wire up the CPU connector. The CPU connector is usually 4 or 8 pins. Now some motherboards have 12 pins and others don't have any pins. But on this motherboard it's a 4-pin connector. And it looks like this. This power supply actually has 2 4-pins because it can support up to an 8-pin. And it's up here. The connector is actually up here right next to the CPU. And the clip goes to the top edge of the board. And we're just going to clip that on there. And that's all we need to do. We'll probably wire tie that back. So we're going to grab one of these wire ties. And wire tie this connector back. Let's make sure I get the zip tie the right way. You're seeing me struggle with my large hands in this small case. Basically, like I said before, if this is your first build, it's not the easiest case to build in. It is one of the smallest cases on the market. Yeah, it's one of the smallest cases on the market. So if you've got large hands, it's probably not the best case for you. There, we'll just cut that tail off. And there's our 4-pin installed, and we'll wire tie that after out of the fan's way up here. Now you'll see we have 2 fans in this build. And from memory, we only have 1 fan header. So, which one do you use? Well, we're going to use the back fan here. And we're just going to straight up remove the other one, because the customer is probably not going to use it. So we'll just set this up. That was that PCI Express cover I showed earlier. And the fan is these 4 screws here. So just want to undo the screws. Now fans, they use a very thick thread screw. There's nothing else like them in a computer build. They're really thick. The thread is almost as big as the head of the screw. And we're just going to remove the fan here. I've got my hand inside the case, holding the fan up so it doesn't fall on any of our components. And you probably don't need to have your hand there until you start removing the last screw, but yeah. And there's the fan out with its cable. We'll sit that over there, and we'll just pop this screw out. There we are. So we're going to turn this back around. And this is the only fan we're going to be using. It's got a 3-pin header. 3 pins can go on 4-pin sockets. 4 pins can go on 3-pin sockets. It's better if you put a 4-pin on a 4-pin, but we're going to use the only fan header in this board, which is up here by the CPU. It only goes on one way, and it just slides on if you can get your fingers in there. There we are. Now we'll want to wire tie this out of the way. Usually I wire tie these back fan cables back around here, usually inside the screw hole. But yeah, that's out of the way, and yeah. So that's everything installed, pretty much. All we got to do now is tidy up the cabling and the hard drive and the PCI Express card. So we're going to put the PCI Express card in now, and we're going to use the second from the top port. So I think you just push these out. Yep, they just come out. We're going to put in this PCI Express card. This is a Wi-Fi card. The customer wanted Wi-Fi. We're going to make sure we're putting it in the right slot and just give it some pressure. And then we want to grab the, I believe it's this screw with the round head. I believe. No, it's not. It's way, way, way too thin a thread. Maybe it's the... Actually, I think the bracket that we took out... Yeah, the bracket that we took out has the screw. So if we stick this bracket... How did that come out? It came out, fell into the case, didn't it? So there we are. We put that bracket in. And I won't be able to show you this because of all the wires, but I'm just going to do the thumb screw back up. And that's our wireless card installed. I'm just testing to see here how the case is going to close up. So it's going to close up like that. So all the wiring, guys, is going to have to be done from the other side of the case. So this goes in like so. This is the hard drive I installed right at the start. And this is going to go in like so. But these cables here have to be on this side. So I'm going to flip this case around and probably stand it up. So I'll be back in a sec, guys. Now we need to remount the hard drive back into the case. So we got to do a bit of imagining here. Basically, well, no, not imagining. What am I trying to say? We've basically got to squeeze it in since it's such a small case. And just line up the screw holes, see where it's got to go. and we're going to leave it leaning there for a second. I'm going to get a screw on my screwdriver ready. I'm going to line up these top holes here, and we're just going to leave one hanging. It's not screwed in all the way. We're just letting the drive cage hang a bit. And I'm going to set my screwdriver to not ratchet. And we're going to screw these in. There is 4 screws in this, so you want to install all 4 of them. Now we did tighten them down. You don't have to do that. I did, just to save a little bit of time. There we are, that one's in, and be careful not to knock over a side panel that's sitting on a box. When you're going to put the last screw in, and that drive cage is back in. Now what we want to do is hook up our SATA power connection to the back of the optical drive up here. Now this is going to be a bit difficult to film, but it's just one connector. It only goes in one way, and I'm actually going to use a separate lead if I can. Yep, we'll use this one. We'll use separate leads for the optical drive and the hard drive just to make the cabling look a bit cleaner. And it doesn't matter which SATA port you use, they're all the same. So we're just going to stick it into the hard drive as well. And finally, if I can find it, our SATA data connector. Just going to go on this way. And I think we'll swap these around actually between the optical drive and the hard drive. So we'll put the right-angled one in the optical drive, just because that right-angled one on the hard drive would have interfered with the case closing. We'll install this straight one there. And now our computer's ready to test boot. So you want to grab a keyboard, mouse, and monitor. And yeah, we'll get ready to test boot. Alright guys, so funny story. Apparently when we tried to put in the hard drive, we unplugged the power and reset switch. So yeah, now hopefully it'll work. So we're going to press the power button here. Fans are spinning, as you can probably see. We've got the Asus splash screen. And there we are, we got put into the BIOS. So now we just got to reinstall the hard drive and tidy up all our cabling and then load Windows. So yeah. So we've installed Windows and tidied up the cabling. We've just done a final test that it's all working, and this system is actually very quiet. So yeah, the only thing really to do is unplug the antenna, unplug all of this, box it all up and give it back to the customer. We also ran it through all the Windows updates and installed the latest drivers from the Asus website, because that's the manufacturer of our motherboard. We also installed the TP-Link wireless card drivers off the DVD that came with, and yeah,
Just make sure, if you're building in this case, that when you put the hard drives in, that none of the front panel connectors come out. That happened to me, and when I put them back in, the hard drive LED I put in backwards. Good thing we tested that. So thank you for watching. Please don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.